Hey, how you doing? How's everybody? How's everything going? Okay, let's do it to it. Excuse me. Let's get on to our studies. Okay, dokie. Let's see what we got here. I'm gonna do board editor. Okay, this is chapter 2 in the book. Good chess comes from good habits. That's what the author says. Excuse me. Making the jump to master requires taking something that you know is a good trait and turning it into a habit. Excuse me. You already have several good habits. You might not appreciate them, but you do. For example, when you were a beginner, you were told that as soon as your opponent makes a move, you should look to see whether he makes a threat. At first, you had to make some concessions in the effort to do this. But after a while, you did it automatically. It had become a habit to you as a chess player. You already know some, if not most, of the traits that masters have made their habits, have made into their habits. But you probably don't take them as serious as masters do. Perhaps because they sound too simple. For instance, masters always look for targets. The easiest way to find the best move is to typically position in a position is to take note of the pieces, the pawns that you can attack. You might be able to attack them on the next move or on the move after that, or even at some future distant point. That's what he's trying to say. And then we're going to set up the game that it goes to, that they just talked about. So let's get that set up. But I wanted to read that to you, my Chess Cruncher team, to see. So habits are very important in chess, as we've seen from what the author has told us. So good habits make a good chess player. And then when you implement it fully, you become a great chess player. And that's kind of a little bit that I think of what the author is trying to say is that the greats have automatically look for targets. So we probably say, how do they see that? It's an automatic habit that they look at. They look for targets. They look to see if a piece is on pre. They make ideas based around that. And if you can do that, you'll start to improve as a chess player in all areas, in your tactics and in your positional play. Okie dokie. Let's see, we got everything good so far. I'm just taking a look to make sure I have it all ready. Okay, white to play perfect. We'll just do castles just in case. And we don't need to have castles on, but hey, I'm not going to turn it down. Like you gotta I'm making that a habit that I instantly put that in, so that I don't forget. Because one time we were very blessed that we didn't have any castles, but it could have actually gone down that route. So let's do this here. That's a 4. Okay. Perfect. It's white to move, so we look at it from white's perspective. There we go. So now we're in chapter 2, habits. Black's pieces are somewhat more active than white's, and he has a passed c-pawn. Black does. Yet white's best strategy should be to ignore all that and attack. The attack should go directly at g7. So like this passed pawn that they're talking about here is of no consequence to white. White should try to go after this here and attack here with all their might, with all white's might. So if we were to say what would be a good move here, you'd probably ask, why go for G? That's what the author is saying, G7. Why go for G7? What makes G7 a target is that black has no pieces that can easily defend it. Just his king. White, on the other hand, can throw virtually all his pieces at G5 or G7. White begins with a really nice move, Bishop G5. Exclaim. This would be kind of a tougher one to be able to see. I know you probably were thinking, why not bring the queen into H4, then go probably G5 after that, or H6, right? You're probably thinking something like this. Come in here, and then next Bishop H6, right? But that could easily be handled. I think they talk about that by either, let me see, I'm thinking that potentially probably G6. Okay. A queen to C. Okay, gotcha. Queen, and then this idea could still come to fruition, but a little bit more difficult. So basically, rather than worry about this queen move here, because the problem with, I see now the problem with queen G4, it surrenders D4 too easily, because then queen C3, same thing, but the queen potentially could at this point take, and then if possible take again, and then you would have a situation where the excuse me, where the queen could actually guard G7 potentially. So why they didn't do that was why they played Bishop G5. Now we know is so that the queen could guard D4 at the present moment. So his idea was after Bishop G5 to go Queen G4, and then either try to mate by F6 with Bishop to F6 or Bishop H6. Either one would be that type of idea. What a very permanent threat. With so much material on the board, it might seem that black can pari easy the attack. He cannot. If he plays King H8, this is just a line. R, black plays Rook. Let me see. Oh nope, that's right. So that's what he's talking about. H8, and tries to go bring his rook to G7 or G8 to guard G7. Then H7 is another high value target via Queen H5, Rook F3, and then Rook to H3. Excuse me. So we have to see what actually got played here. Okay. Okay, dokie. B takes C was actually what was played here. Queen G4, King H8 with the idea of trying to guard. Rook F3. Remember that the next high target's there. C takes D4, Rook H3. White will play Queen H5 or Queen H4. These 2 points are really strong for White. For the Queen will try to double up on the H file and go for mate. And then the bishop can even sack its life for the win. The H6 will be met if H6 is played. H6 would be met by bishop takes. So White will so black played F5. So then after, if I'll show you what was played. Queen H5 was played, and that was an exclam. But if White got greedy and then went E takes F. Oops, sorry, wrong takes. E takes F5. Bishop takes E5, and now the queen guards the pawn. And now she can come in. Queen H4. And then queen takes F5, and the queen would defend. And so even back here, like what we were talking about, if after F5 we take here, then G6 could actually be played here. Queen H4 and Rook F7, and then the Rook guards H7, and the attack's all over. White looked past that idea and realized that the best continuation you would think that these two moves each basically do the same thing, right? Not so. The reason our opponent played Queen H5 was actually to guard against Rook F7. Because remember that last line here? When we took here, then G4, H4, and here, that the Rook can guard H7. H5, Queen H5, guards that Rook from getting involved there. And the Rook would really want to get to F7 and then play G6 to guard H7. But the problem is, the only way the Rook can get there now is Rook G8, G6, and H7. Too slow. So okay, King G8, Queen takes, check, King F8, Queen H5, check, King G8, Bishop F6, exclam. Now they're threatening mate after Bishop takes. Black lost because G7 was weak. If takes here, I know you see the continuation, Queen G6 mate. And now you get to see the power of having a queen on H5. It covers the F6. And I'm thinking that even after Rook F7 here, even if they tried Rook F7, there's a mate in 1 or a mate in 2. Same type of move. Okay, I gotta get a drink of Just a drink. Ah, much better. We need to. Okay, lost. He needed to find his own targets. For example, let's see here. Um, Black lost because of the G5 weakness, so we know that. Black needed to find his own targets. For example, if Queen on move 2, Queen C3, then instead of King to H8, would allow him to meet Bishop F6 with Queen to E3 check. And then after the king would move, the queen could actually come into H6 and defend the attack. Rook A, D8. And black has queen, bishop A4, and this the queen C6 is an exclam, and bishop A4 is also an exclam idea. Oops, I gotta do the exclam. There we go. His bishop, which can play no role in the defense, can attack. The game would be very double-edged after bishop H. Hold on, what am I overlooking here? Hold on 1 second. Ah, that's the problem. That's the problem. Let me make sure I'm reading this right, because sometimes it's hard when they add writing and then they add the notation. Okay. Ah, got it. They're talking about here. Nope, that's not right. Ah, bishop, here we go. Bishop H here, and then G6, and then Queen F4, and now F5 exclam guards. This is what they were referring to. The moral is white can play a strong one as a strong one. No, white had. Oh, sorry, I had that wrong. It was plan instead of play. The moral is white had a plan, a strong one. As soon as he recognized that G7 was a weakness, so we'll go back here to the very, very, very beginning. when white realized that G7 was a weakness because there's only one defender, which was the black king, black failed to recognize targets and lost. When you are a beginner, you probably got into the habit of looking at the captures available to you when it was your turn to move. The habit of looking for targets is just an extension of this. In addition, what can I take? You want to ask yourself, what can I attack in a few moves? So instead of what can I take, you need to ask yourself, what can I attack? And that's what white asked themselves, was what can, my pieces are kind of awkwardly placed, and black would say, wow, white's pieces are not in play, my pieces are active, hoorah, right? Yeah. But white didn't look at that as like, oh no, I'm in trouble. White looked at the board and said, huh, is there any targets that I could attack? Are there any, it's not pieces to capture. Are there any targets I could attack? And white noticed G7 was a target, a deadly target, a mating target. And so then white went about their plan of finding the best continuation for that plan, and that's when they came up with bishop G5, and that's kind of what they're saying here. This sounds too simple-minded to many amateurs. They think like that's what the author's saying. It sounds so simple, too simple. It's like, really? That's all I got to do? Why look for enemy? Why look for enemy pieces and pawns that you can immediately attack? This way of thinking blinds the player to opportunities like the following. We're going to be looking at another game here. This is another game that we're going to look at. The opportunity for targets. So, like what Jeremy Silman always says, that you should have target conscience. He talks about that in his books. That targets are important, as important as capturing pieces. Because as we got to see in the last game, it was so important that it won the entire game. Just that one plan took black by surprise, and black had no idea how to handle it, because for some reason they didn't see that checking move like what we saw, and that would have actually been able to defend. They started reacting instead of being finding their own plans. And if you can get your opponent into reactive chess, then you're basically winning. Just want to make sure I have all this right. And right here, the bishops. Okay. It's white to move here. A study. Let me get this. There we go. Let me make sure I have this right. Okay. Oh, not a D, it's an S. I don't know how I got a D there. That's why I always make sure I have the name spelled proper. There we go. White to move. Normal analysis. Look for targets in black's camp before you read any further. Do you see it? I'll give you a second to look at it and see if you can see. Actually, we're going to probably just continue moving forward, but if you're watching this on a pre-recording, then stop the video and try to find as white the target in black's camps. Okay? So stop it now, and then you can pick up a little later if you want to, or what you can do is follow along with us and continue. It's all up to you at this point. Okay. The only member of black's army that is not protected is the pawn on g7. It is easy to overlook because it's shielded by the G file by two pieces. Of course, not every target is worth going after, but here it shouldn't be hard to grasp that if white can play queen takes g7, he is doing very well. Once you identify the target and determine that it is worth going after, the next step is to figure out how to get at it. There may not be a way. It is not always possible to exploit a target. So you have to always remember that it's not always you can't sometimes always go after the targets that you want. Like let's say that this was the king's castle or something. We would want to go after g7, right? But sometimes you can't go after g7 if there's not enough pieces for the attack. So what we're trying to say is don't force an attack if it's not there. Set up for it, build up, and then go for the KO. Okay. But in this case, white found a way to do it. And the first move that allows this to come to pass is e6, exclaim. e6 is an important move. It blocks the bishop, and it also forces one of the pieces off of the g file. He threatens queen takes g, and then he also threatens taking the knight. So the bishop's kind of forced into playing bishop takes e6. Now the pawn, we play Harry the H pawn, exclaim again, with the idea of playing h5, which would kick the knight out and win the g7 pawn. White threatens to play h5 like what we just talked about, and when the knight moves, queen takes g7. We just talked about that. If black tries to protect the g-pawn with his king, it becomes that g-pawn becomes an even bigger target. We're going to put in what black played, which was h5. But let's see what would happen if black actually castled. Now h5 comes into play. Knight e7, and then queen h6, exclaim. This actually picks up a rook. So now we're doing rather well here. g6, and then we have to ask ourselves, is a rook what we want? We want mate, right? So what again is the target that we're wanting to go after? Of course, g7. So with that calling to us, the idea is queen e5, exclaim, because that rook is still hanging in this type of setup. We're still doing good here. And so at this point, I know what you're saying. Oh, I could just play f6, right? Nope. That's the whole idea. Is you take with check, and now you're doing rather well. Two pieces are on pre, and you can try to guard one piece by playing rook e8 to guard the rook, right? You just take here. If pawn takes, then bishop takes, and now this rook is attacked. The knight has to take, and then you just totally won at that point. So there's also, let me see here, another line that potentially could be played if black doesn't want to put themselves in that much of a problem. King f8 could be played here. Then h5 still comes, and then knight e7, h6 here, and the pawn takes, that's with check. So g6, and now bishop g5 attacks the knight, and it's soon gonna try. The bishop's gonna try to slip in via f6 into g7 and cause some chaos along there. Followed by also queen d6 can be played too. These moves are really important. There's also one other line that could potentially come to pass, rook g8, which now black loses castling rights. Same type of thing. Actually, it's different now. f4. Now the idea is they turn their attention to target on f5. Now the bishop is a target because it's pinned to the king. So f4 is a beautiful move, really beautiful. In the end, let's see here. Oops, what did I? Oh, let's see here. Sorry about that. It's king d7 was played here. So this is the line. There we go. Then h5. That's the problem. Knight e7, and then queen takes g7. This is what he says. Don't take offense at it. He says beginners often make a concrete effect to threaten their opponent's queen simply because it is so valuable. So they make an effort to attack the queen. But queens are valuable because they're so mobile. They can run away. The best targets are typically pawns because they tend to be basically stationary. Most stationary pawns are basically stuck on squares because obviously they can't move back, and they can't move once they get moved forward. But why would a square be so valuable enough to target? So squares become targets as well. Consider the next example. So what the author is saying is pawns are vulnerable, and squares end up becoming vulnerable as well. Like if we found out that if you can set up for some patterns that end in mate, that ends up coming to pass too. Okay, let's set up another one. This is a game, I think it's Gadakomsky as white versus Gruszczyk as black. So Gruszczyk's black and Gadakomsky's white. So this should be a pretty good, this will be a really good battle here. Okay, let's one more pawn right here. Let's set up for white. My teacher told me that this knight rook right here it's called an anchored rook because of how it has an anchor, a pawn that's anchoring it. If you think of a ship that throws down anchor, it's not going to move when a storm comes. So this rook, the only way to remove it would be to take it, and then the pawn would take back. So yeah, that's just a little bit of what my Grandmaster teacher taught me. So I wanted to share that with you, my Chess Cruncher team. Let's see, bishops. Let's see, okay, Doki. I think we have everything. Let me make sure I got this. Yep. Yep. Still good. Everything's good. Nice. Nice and nice. Nice. Okay, black to move here, so it's Khrushchev's move. And now we're going to turn this into a study. Two 2010. Good, I spelled that right? I spelled that right. It's black to move. We'll look at it from black's point of view. At first, black's only target seems to be the D pawn for black, but rook takes D3 is not accomplishable. Basically, you can't do it right at this moment because the bishop's jamming up the gears, or gumming up the gears, as we like to say. So that's not playable. An alternate idea potentially for black would be rook df8, which threatens rook takes f1. The rook on f1. Black can play rook f2, and try to expose the knight on g2. And let me see here, g2, right? Perhaps with knight takes. Let me see here. Let's play this one move for black really fast. Bishop b1. Exclam. So what they're trying to say is rook. Oops, I have to go back. Rook d f8 with the idea of taking. So this sets up. This would have to be so that if rook takes, then rook would take, and now you're targeting these 2 points here, and it's vital. These two are really weak spots. Like if the rook went to d1 to guard the pawn. What they're saying is rook f2 ends up becoming a threat as well. So that's kind of the idea. It is a it's a tactical motif. No, sorry, it's tactical justification by playing. Sorry, right here. It looks tactical, right? But is it is it enough? Is it enough? That's the whole thing. And no, they consider this a question mark. This is a sideline. It pins the knight to its doom. So that's why they didn't go. White didn't try to grab a pawn on a7. That would lose the entire game by being greedy. Bishop a1 was actually played here. Rook f d8. Rook takes f3. And instead of the pawn takes, a stronger move would actually have been to play g takes f3. This is actually an even stronger move because Grushchuk realized that the knight's a target and that we can actually now play f2 and end up queening. Potentially have a queening threat. It does look interesting. Rook takes f3, but the only sitch is this could potentially now be defended via rook to da1 or rook b3, either one of those. And then there's not much that Black has at this point. All of Black's initiative has been basically it's been fizzled out. So that's why Grushchuk went, you know what, a rook behind a pawn is always strong. That's what Grushchuk basically configured. All of a sudden, h3 goes from being one of the least significant squares for Black, like a1 or b8, to the most important one. White has no satisfaction way to meet this move continuation, bishop c8. This idea also allots for the infiltration here. Bishop c1 and then queen in. So it looks tempting. Remember, look for squares. He tried knight to e3. Gonikovsky did. His kingside collapsed after queen f8, or not queen f, bishop f8 or c8. Exclam. g4, and then wham, h5. Excuse me. That was really a good move. And he resigned in 5 moves later. Let's see how we're doing for time. Okay, we have enough time for one more. 1 second, I gotta get a sip. In the next section that we're going to be going into, not chapter, section. What the author says in the habits chapter is targets equal initiative. So chess can be a simple game if we forget about positional play and just look for targets. A few pages ago, we saw how a plan was just a matter of figuring out how white can get his pieces to attack g7. In the same way, an initiative can be nothing more than a series of threats to different targets. For example, here's a we're going to put in one more game. One more. Let me make sure I have all this right. Let me make sure we have this. Yeah. And it's white to move here. All right. Okay, dokie. This is, oops, yeah, we gotta put this in so we can start at it. Perfect. What matters most here, the players disagree. Black would like to think it's his extra pawn. White prefers to believe it's his lead in development. But development comes with an expiration date. Basically, eventually black can catch up. If white doesn't convert to his assets, when you invest and you do investments, you acquire assets, stuff that generates money for you and stuff like that. That's basically what what they're saying here is, if white doesn't take and whatever the amount of time and pawn that they invested here, turn it into something that's tangible, a tangible asset of maybe winning a bishop, maybe winning a rook, something, then all of white's developmental assets will just have dissipated. And that could be like a deal, could be for a certain amount of time, and then it's over. And so you have to sometimes make sure that you move on the deal. Same thing here, you have to make sure that your pieces move in on the target that you want, and you don't diddle daddle around, like I like to say. Just move pieces non-thinkingly. Okay. Yeah, if white doesn't convert to their assets, black will catch up. When the extra pawn, then the extra pawn will count more than it does now. White played a really strong move, queen a1, a3, exclaim. The idea is that the queen is threatening e7 mate, and the knight will eventually hop into c6, and then when the pawn takes back here, the queen can grab the rook on a8. So this is a threat of an attack that is in the future, and white's using their threat of an attack to their advantage, which is the development. White's using their asset of developmental to their advantage. If black tries castling, which is a sideline, this is actually a mistake, because then white will come crashing down with bishop takes. And the second point is white has a threat of attacking the rook and the queen here, and then and like what we also said, the attack on h6 to boot. What actually was played here was bishop f8. Bishop f8 was what was played, so that we can keep our lines open here. Knight, one of the best continuations is potentially knight b6, since queen takes b6. Hold on, let me make sure that this is right. Oh, okay. So what they're saying here is if f6, this was the move here, then white would play a to b8, a b1, exclaim. And then what would happen, and black would meet the b6 threat with knight d7, and now white would play bishop g4. Is very strong in view of bishop takes d7 here. White can also take advantage of f5 with knight to d6, exclaim as well. This I have to put an exclam mark. Hold on. E takes d, and then bishop takes. Or if instead king f8, then queen to b3 with the threat of mate on f7. Let's stop. Okay, let's see here. Let's stop for a moment and consider the alternate f6. As ugly as it looks, the backward step bishop f8 defends e7. It stops the knight to b6. So this move here, black's able to stop knight b6. The weakness of d6, what the weakness of d6 or f6, sorry, did not for black. This move protects everything. This move does nothing but just weaken the king side. This move protects everything and stops the plan. White can renew the knight to b6 idea with this line here, a b8, a b1. He can then meet b5 with knight to a5 here. and with considerable pressure. But the game white had a different idea, exploiting a newly vulnerable weakness for black that black just did. So this is d5 was actually played. Wait a second. Sorry, right after this d5 was actually played. This is the proper move, and it's an exclam for white. So you could the other line is possible, but which piece just what we looked at, we just looked for one because of the unprotected results of f6. F6 now is because of this right here. So actually, which piece? Well, just look for one that becomes unprotected. The result of, sorry, it wasn't f6. I read that wrong. Let me get to my, I lost my spot. 1 second. So we have to now look at which piece is in which spot would be a good attacking move for white, right? After bishop f8. That's right. It's the rook on h8 now becomes a target because there's no protectorate there to protect it, and this dark squared position ends up our line here becomes very weak indeed for black. Once you see that, it becomes easier to spot a way to attack it. And the way to attack it is d5. Pawn d5, which opens up the diagonal a1 to h8 diagonal and would cause a lot of problems. C takes d. This is actually what's played in the game, but we're going to actually look at a sideline. If queen takes d5, then knight b6 actually renews the threat of winning a piece. And so that because then the knight had to be taken and the queen would take, and so a piece falls, and that's why the only move that could be played is c takes d5. Queen to c3 now threatens the rook, and let me see here, which threatens bishop takes h, and then knight to d6, which then would threaten to pick up a piece. Check. So f3, f6 was played here, but if, for example, d4 would be played here, e takes d4, because the queen would take back, we don't want that. And then g7, inviting knight d6. Knight d6 exclam is a really strong move. Queen takes d6, queen takes c8 check, queen d8, and then bishop b5. Knight d7, bishop takes d7. There's also bishop check. If knight there, then the bishop could actually take, the queen could actually take on b7 and winning either way. But after f6, to stop all those ideas, knight d6 still comes into play, and it works either way, that idea. So check. And the continuation could go e takes d6, bishop takes f, which actually attacks the rook and the queen. If queen takes, hold on. or if queen takes d6, queen takes c8, and then that line comes to pass if king f7, and then bishop b5 exclam at this point. It's really strong. Better than the it's better than, let me see, queen takes b7. That moves better, because then queen c6, and this would hold for black. So let's do a quick read. This is called targets in defense, and then we'll stop here. Actually, we probably should stop here because this would lead into a game, so we don't want to venture too far out without having a game to back up. So we're probably going to call it on this for tonight. Alrighty. I wanted to thank you all for participating, logging on, looking at habits, good habits in chess. Like looking, rather than, we already do good habits of looking for targets, attack, and developing our pieces, like our minor pieces before our major pieces, castling our king to safety. Those are good habits to look at. Also looking for pieces to capture and blunder checks are good. But what we're looking at, the habits of looking for targets, not just pieces to attack, but targets. And we got to see on that the g7 pawn in the first game that we went over was a target. Even though white looked like they were behind in development, they spotted a weakness for black, and it was g7, because the only piece they could defend it was the king. And so then the bishop came over, the queen came over, and all the pieces just flooded in and won. And our second idea that we looked at, let me make sure I have this, was a Gotakomsky game between Grushchek, and what happened there was it ended up becoming a pass pawn, and the king side just collapsed via after taking properly. It wasn't over the d3 pawn like what we talked about. It was based on good habits of spotting targets, and Grushchek saw that and took the time to set up for the position to win. So when you start improving as a chess player, my Chess Cruncher team, you'll start noticing your habits. The habits will change. You'll stop looking at always kingside attacks or just attack the king. You'll look for targets. You'll look to see what piece is not protected. Can I take advantage of that? What square is not protected? Can I take advantage of that? And that just comes with time. And as important as good habits, we should also remember that it's important to receive the Lord Jesus, Lord and Savior of your life. And I pray that you make that decision, because we all one day have to decide what we're going to do with the Lord Jesus. But remember this, Bruce Lee said that you got to take what you know, like what we're doing here, and apply it and be willing to do something with it. That's what the Chess Cruncher model is all about, of hanging up your coats, hanging up your hats, sitting down and studying when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. As Wesley So says, serve the Lord Jesus. As I say, God bless, and I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. And Lord willing, we'll be back on tomorrow, and we'll keep pushing forward. Remember what Hannibal Smith said, though. Even inside of a random position, there's always a plan. And we got to see that from like 3 of the games. There's always a plan. Even when it looks random, there's always a plan. And when you find it, and you get to implement it, because of good habits, we get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, 2 thumbs up, hoorah, be blessed, and keep studying chess and having fun always, and keep learning good habits like that. What we're going over, studying is as important as playing games. Okay, I will see you tomorrow. Be blessed. Bye-bye.